So this is my video part 2 for my intro. In this video, I kind of wanted to go over a little more of my personality and kind of my background, where I'm from, so you kind of have a better understanding of where my opinion formulates. So I'm gonna start with like a timeline of my life, kind of leading up to this point, so that you know where I'm coming from. So I was born and raised in San Diego, California. At that time, my mom was very young and she already had 2 other daughters. She was a drug user, and so it was very hard for her to maintain a life, and I was in and out of foster care, homeless shelters, and around the age of 7, I was taken to what is called Polinsky, which is like a level above foster care. It's essentially for older kids who are just, you know, they're not babies, so it's a little harder to get adopted. Me and my sisters, so at this point I had 1 younger sister and 2 older sisters. We had been in there for a while, and so my grandparents took on me and my 2 older sisters, and my younger sister, who was half Native American, went through the Native American Bureau. And so I went from one polar extreme to the next. So my mother was like a hippie and drug user and just free-for-all, trusting too many people and letting too many horrible things happen. And then I went to my grandparents, who were like really Christian, very religious, and even though they had money, they were very strict. It was very difficult to find my identity because here I was, this kid who suffered poverty and lived in homeless shelters and went without food and wasn't really in school, and then all of a sudden now I was with my wealthy grandparents who had enrolled me in like a pretty nice school. And you know, I couldn't really relate to many kids my age because you know, they would say, where are your parents? Where are your parents? Why are you with your grandparents? And I didn't want to tell them everything that had happened leading up to that, so I just ended up telling people my mom was dead. When I was about 14, my mother got her life a little bit back on track, and I decided at that point I wanted to be LDS or Mormon. So I wanted to switch from Christianity to Mormonism, and so I went to go live back with my mom. But that was like a huge issue because she wasn't, you know, because once somebody is an addict, it's very hard for them to truly kick the habit or stay clean. That just kind of cycled into another few years of poverty and struggling with my identity. That's when I started getting really depressed. I hated school. I found no interest in church anymore, just struggling. And then when I was about 17, my mom was insinuating we would have to go back to a homeless shelter. And at that point, I was just too old for that game. And I didn't want to do it anymore, so I asked to move back with my grandparents. I tested out of high school and I started community college. So when I started community college, about a year in, my mother passed away due to her addiction, and that was really hard on me. And after that, I went in and out of relationships, and you know, with my sexuality, just went through a hard time finding my identity and finding stable footing. I even was homeless again, living in a tent. I was having a hard time completing semesters, and my life was just kind of all over. It wasn't until I was kind of adult adopted by a couple named Dawn and Gilbert that they really helped me get my life on track. They let me live with them rent-free, they helped me get my education, and I just started to have a little bit of a stable life and see my potential. I pretty much owe them a lot to my adulthood because without them I would have never been able to be where I am now. And so when I started university, I was about a year from graduating, and I didn't have a lot to show for it. I wasn't ready to graduate, so I decided to do a study abroad in Hamburg, Germany, and that experience taught me a lot about myself. I had gotten out of a 3-year toxic relationship, and I just decided it was time for me to move forward in my life and try to live independent and try to throw away some of those old bad memories that were holding me down and the emotional traumas. And I decided, you know what, this is my way to start new. And I told my family, you know, if I go there and I'm much happier, I'm not coming back. As many people know, in California, it's a struggle to maintain bills. It's a struggle to rise above poverty. And for me, I just didn't want to struggle. Even with Dawn and Gilbert's help, I wanted to have a life that was my own and wasn't, you know, burdened by issues with family or issues with my past. And so when I got to Hamburg, it was actually quite nice, and I found a little more about myself, and I found freedoms in myself that I was too afraid to explore. And, you know, I did the online dating thing, and I met somebody, and I decided that I wasn't going back, and so I moved to Berlin, and that's where I am now. Although that's kind of just like a timeline, there's obviously a lot more ins and outs of that, And I'm hoping that as the blog develops, you know, each little piece will kind of get put together and I have a little more insight. You know, I experienced foster care, I've experienced poverty, I've experienced death, I've experienced, you know, just a lot of different things, you know, questioning my sexuality, questioning toxic relationships, finding my own self-love and letting go of hurts of the past. And it's taken me a long time and I'm still developing that, but I'm hoping that as this kind of blog develops, you kind of piece together little things and I can kind of go into different topics or different experiences in my life and kind of give a complete picture of just who I am and why I feel the way or why I'm outspoken about certain things or certain topics, just from personal experience and maybe from secondary personal experience. Okay, so that was like a mouthful of my timeline, but that's not always everything that I'm about. I actually have quite a few interests. I really love photography. I know on my Instagram the photos are of me, but I actually am used to taking photos of other people and I find that to be like a real sense of accomplishment and actually very therapeutic. I was a television, film, and news media major, so I know these vlogs aren't the best, but I actually have a very high expectation of myself, so I'm hoping to kind of work my way. I like being behind the camera, but being in front of the camera, I guess I gotta make it work. I spend a lot of time wanting to do projects with other people and I realized I couldn't always rely on other people to fulfill these projects. So I'm now the subject matter of my own project. So some of my interests, I love movies, I love music, I love Harry Potter, Adventure Time, Hello Kitty, I love tattoos, I'm super obsessed with tattoo culture. I watch all those shows, or like the only shows that they have with like Ink Master or, you know, the Face Off, because there's like a lot of creativity. I even like Project Runway because of the creativity. I like seeing what people come up with, so I'm super enticed by that. I have about 8 tattoos and I'm hoping that once I get more money I can essentially have a body of collection of art. And I'm huge about art. I love all types of art. I'm a big Pablo Picasso fan, Salvador Dali, but I also like, you know, the small artists that you see at the flea markets that are just trying to express himself through creativity, so I'm super big about art. I would say my personality in person is I tend to talk a lot, so that is true. I always have a lot to say. I say I'm never a one-word answer person, like you want a yes or no and I'm gonna tell you a whole story. So that's also why I'm making the blog, is to be able to have a platform to tell these kinds of stories and experiences. I would say I'm pretty addicted to memes as well. I spend a lot of time scrolling and looking at memes, and I really like Instagram for that because I like seeing the pictures and the things that people do, and I'm super supportive of people wanting to express their creativity. When I first got to Germany, that was the first time I had ever traveled outside of the United States, but I'd always wanted to travel outside of the United States. I just never had the money. And so when I came to Europe, I did a lot of traveling. The thing with Europe is that it's fairly cheap to hop around countries. Being in Berlin, Italy is only an hour and a half away and it almost feels like a different world in some parts, so it's really nice to be able to have that kind of cultural influence. And being in Europe has taught me to be more adaptable to different people, but I think it also gives me a perspective of the United States outside of the United States. I also went through a K-pop phase. I know some of you can relate, but that's also something that's like an interesting fact about me, is like I was super obsessed with Korea for a few years. I have a library of knowledge about Korea. I also have spent a lot of time in and out of community college classes, so I feel like I've taken a ton of classes that were just like intro to psych, intro to business, intro to sociology. So I have like touched base on a lot of different subjects. So I consider myself an advocate for a few things that I'm super passionate about, including women's rights, LGBTQ rights. I'm really about body mod and body acceptance, body positivity. I'm also a big advocate for medical and recreational use of cannabis. I think it can be a lifesaver for many people. I'm not religious. I don't always believe in organized religion. I like the idea of soulmates. I like the idea of reincarnation. I like the idea of karma. So I would say if I had any religion, it falls a little bit into neo-paganism. I also accept the fact that maybe there is nothing after this life, and that's why it's really important to make your happinesses, even if they didn't come early on and even though you're trying your best. Anyways, there's a million other things about me that I could express in this video, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background into my economic status, kind of how I grew up, maybe some things I've had to question along the way, and then also kind of little quirks about me now. As the blog develops, I'm sure there'll be more and more that kind of comes forth, or maybe even some opinions that slightly change or tweak as the years go on. As people, we try to compartmentalize ideas into 1 or 2 sentences because we think that's all people have an attention span for. And I think it's really hard to talk about an opinion that you can't just compartmentalize. And so I'm hoping that with this blog I can kind of explain a little more where I'm coming from. My Instagram is more like my instant kind of photos or just little topics here or there. But I'm hoping that with this blog I can kind of explain myself and kind of go into details why I feel that way, or why I'm for this or why I'm for that. And so hopefully you find this entertaining or at least interesting, and you follow me as I develop and kind of explore these different ideas.